Hello, I'm Melissa Roberts, Executive Director for Bristol's Promise. At Bristol's Promise, we mobilize our community around issues impacting children, youth, and families. To that end, I'd like to talk with you about the violence we're facing in our nation. We're tired. Collectively, as a community, as a country, as a world, we're tired. We've been through a pandemic, community division, civil unrest, relentless wars and strife, and we're tired. I see the statistics, but more directly, I see it in my friends, my family, coworkers, and community. And I hear the same from people in other communities across the nation and around the world. And now, on top of being tired, we have 10 more African Americans who are dead, targeted simply for the color of their skin. 17 people injured at a basketball game, 5 people wounded, and another shot dead at a church picnic, 4 people injured in a shooting at a high school graduation, 2 killed and 3 injured at a flea market, 1 killed and 4 injured at a nightclub, and now 19 children and 2 adults at an elementary school. These mass shootings all occurred over the course of a week and a half, just 11 days, and 85 people are dead or injured from gun violence. And what is one of the strongest similarities each of these tragedies has in common? Trauma. I'm sure you thought I was going to say guns, and yes, guns are involved in all of these tragedies. Guns allow us to perpetrate violence against each other with a higher injury and death rate. But trauma is the root that leads to violence in the first place. The longer that we ignore trauma and cling to the idea that people need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, the more violence and the more frequent violence we're going to see in our communities. We don't fully comprehend that people who commit these acts of violence don't just wake up one day and decide to perpetrate a violent act suddenly. These people have lives and histories that are often filled with a variety of traumatic events and experiences that have shaped their worldview, that becomes filled with hate, rage, and discrimination, and launches them on a trajectory toward these horrific acts of violence that make the news. These horrific acts of violence that rob us of the lives of so many, both young and old. Make no mistake, past trauma is not an excuse to commit violence, but it is certainly a reason and perhaps a key to preventing future acts of violence. When we refuse to acknowledge trauma, we end up wrongly believing that keeping our children and communities safe comes from increasing our security measures or increasing our guards. This has been our response to previous mass shootings by adding school resource officers and police officers to schools, implementing lockdown drills for our students, spending massive amounts of money on security systems, and even arming our teachers. With all of these increased security responses, statistics show our schools are no safer now than they were 20 years ago. However, when we address trauma, we minimize the chance of a person ever getting to such a mental state as to commit acts of mass violence. When adults take that extra 5 minutes to connect with a child, to truly take an interest in them and their lives, they help prevent violent acts. When a child is involved in a strong group dynamic, such as theater or sports, that helps prevent violent acts. When we show grace instead of disgust to someone living unhoused, we minimize the chance of violent acts. When we share our cultural differences instead of fearing those who don't look like us, we prevent acts of violence. It's through building community and connection that we start to build a more resilient society. When people who are struggling and acting out as a cry for help aren't immediately suspended or summarily kicked out of what may be their only place to form connections, we help prevent future acts of violence. The challenge of prevention is that if what you're doing works, you'll never know if it was that or something else that was the change maker. But we do know that bringing people together one-to-one, in small groups, or in larger community to build interpersonal connection has very few negative effects. Being kind is not synonymous with weakness or passivity. On the contrary, being kind can be hard when someone is so enmeshed in their trauma that they're actively trying to be unlovable. Being kind when you just want to lash out takes strength. And being kind to someone who's completely opposing views on deeply personal values takes a huge amount of willpower. Standing up to your friends when they're bullying someone through racial or cultural slurs takes bravery, and choosing not to say or type that argumentative response takes more courage than being right. Make no mistake, unconditional and unrestricted access to firearms by people whose prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain that's responsible for executive functioning, judgment, and decision-making, is not yet fully developed, can be dangerous to the person who possesses the firearm and can lead to the death and devastation we continue to see. This is based on scientific facts that every child development worker, therapist, neurologist, and psychologist knows to be true. However, mitigating the impacts of trauma can decrease the potential for violent acts. Is this what we want for our children, for our grandchildren, or our communities? No. And therefore, it is the responsibility of each and every one of us to help prevent acts of violence in our society. And it starts with being kind, even when you don't feel like being kind, even when you don't want to deal with that kid anymore, or you don't understand that person and their choices. Even if the kindest thing you can do is walk away. The first step is not saying, "What's wrong with you?" but instead asking, "What happened to you?" If you want to become part of the solution, we encourage you to join the local trauma-informed care networks, attend the national campaign for trauma-informed policy and practice events, or host a trauma-informed training at your church or workplace. To join the conversation, visit bristolspromise.org/be the solution. Thank you.